So I have about 15 minutes or so of material that I will present. And then since I'm a little ADD, I'm not going to look at the chat until I'm done with the presentation. And then I do expect that there will be some comments, questions, concerns that are brought forward. And typically I find that this presentation stimulates a lot of discussion, and I am interested in that. And it's a learning opportunity for both of us. I did this presentation a couple weeks ago to Skagit Council of Governments, and I learned some interesting things that are going on up there that I need to take back to federal highways. So I definitely want to hear what your experiences have been. And with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. All right. So a little bit about me before I launch into this. I recognize some of your names. I've worked with some of you before. I am the environmental manager for the WSDOT Local Programs office, and I also am responsible for NEPA compliance for the Northwest region. So from King County north to the Canadian border. And Jody Beal, who you mentioned earlier, she works with me, and she is responsible for the Olympic region part of Washington State, which includes the peninsula. So anyways, that's who we are and what we do. And I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So before I take a deep dive into the super geeky, sciencey part of the presentation, I'm going to do a little overview here. So what we're talking about is the PE phase of project delivery. So that is what part is going to be affected by this change. And so for those of you who are not aware, the Endangered Species Act compliance is part of NEPA. So we cannot sign NEPA until we have our ESA compliance done. And we can't obligate our right-of-way or construction phases until NEPA is done as well. So you can see that NEPA is contingent on the ESA being compliant. So typically on a normal project, we would start the NEPA process around 30% design. However, when we need a formal ESA consultation, so when projects have adverse effects to endangered species, including salmonids, we need to schedule 12 months for that consultation to happen with the services. And that 12 months does not include the lead time necessary to do the design and the biological assessment preparation. So it is a little bit longer on those projects to get through your NEPA process, because your ESA compliance takes longer, which in turn bumps out the time to get to your right-of-way and your construction phases. And in the past, very unscientifically, I think this probably applied to about, I'm going to say 15 to 20% of our program. So 15 to 20% of our program had adverse effects to salmonids and therefore had to do this formal Endangered Species Act consultation process. So now I'm going to dive a little bit into the history of how we got here. So back when salmonids were listed under the Endangered Species Act, our initial response, our meaning the global we, WSDOT, Federal Highway Administration, National Marine Fisheries Service, what we did is we created a model and we wrote policy about that model. So some of you that do design work might be familiar with the high run model. And so what the high run model did was it initially looked at the probability that a project was going to degrade water quality. And if the answer was no, it's not, we were done, and it was a no effect under the Endangered Species Act. And then we looked at the dilution. So how far are pollutants going to travel in the aquatic environment if the project was going to have an adverse effect? So the dilution model had policy written to it that described what would happen if the model result was less than 1 foot. And if the model result was less than 1 foot, we decided, we being the services, Federal Highways, WSDOT, decided that the project would not have adverse effects to salmonids, and we could go with an informal consultation. So This model was rolled out in 2009, and it looked primarily at copper and zinc, and used copper and zinc as a proxy for all the other toxins in stormwater. So in 2009, we roll out this new model to deal with stormwater effects, and then in 2010, we get the Deepwater Horizon. And I think most of us remember that. It was the big blowout that happened in the Louisiana Gulf Coast area. And so, letting no crisis be wasted, a lot of research dollars were thrown at looking at what do petroleum products do to the environment and what ecological effects are there. And one bit of research that is very pertinent to us is that there were some serious effects observed to fish species. And you can look at the critters on the screen. The critters on the left are the normal ones, and the critters on the right have been exposed to petroleum product. And what was learned from this research is that polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are to blame. And in the short term, they cause ventricular fibrillation. So basically they have little heart attacks. And in the long term, they have physical deformities to their hearts. So it affects their fitness. So they have reduced fitness and reduced stress response. And these effects were seen across a broad spectrum of fish species. So not only does it imply direct effects to salmonids, it also implies food chain impacts to salmonids as well. So that came out in 2014. And then, meanwhile, back here in Puget Sound, we started witnessing urban stream mortality syndrome, or it's also been known as pre-spawn mortality, is another term that has been used. And it was affecting predominantly coho. And we started seeing this in the mid-2010s. And initially, some geospatial analysis was done. And it determined that the land use that was most predictive of seeing these mass die-offs were road densities. So with that information, the focus landed on stormwater again. And so researchers did some comparative mass spectrometry analysis and looked over 2,000 chemicals. And what they found was tire wear particles. That seemed to be the culprit. So then sifting through this stew of contaminants further, they identify 6-ppd quinone from the tire leachate, and this was published, I believe, last year. Within the last 2 years is when this was published. So they've isolated the compound. It is an antioxidant that is added to our tires. So I suspect this is why we now have the 90,000-mile tires on the market. Some interesting things about this: it is extremely acutely toxic. Once exposed, fish do not recover, even when you put them in clean water. It is very difficult to dilute it to an ineffective concentration. And steelhead are also affected, and there's going to be some research coming out within the next year or two looking at how this chemical affects steelhead and Chinook, which are endangered species. So where this leaves us is that what we consider in our industry to be an improvement is actually still harmful to aquatic life. And in addition to the information that was on the previous slide, there's also the reality that our design storms are often getting exceeded. And I think all of us who have lived through the last 2 months here in the Puget Sound area, we know what that looks like. And considering how acute and how toxic this chemical is, we're not looking at dilution being a solution to the pollution in this scenario. So according to National Marine Fisheries Service, all pollution generating impervious surface that drain to surface waters in the Puget Sound watershed are considered an adverse effect to salmonids and therefore require ESA consultations. So you're probably wondering, where do we go from here? Well, that's where we've been trying to figure out. So we've got this emerging science on one side, and then we've been on individual consultations, we've been struggling with regulators trying to apply this science on individual projects. And at this point in time, we need an implementing policy so that we can set some expectations with our agencies and give people realistic timelines and design parameters to work with. So one hint we've gotten from National Marine Fisheries Service is that kind of like copper and zinc were the proxies in back in the 2005 2009 timeframe. Back then, the proxies were the heavy metals for all of the contaminants in stormwater. Well, this time around in the 2010 or 2020s, we're going to be looking at the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and they are going to be the proxy for 6-PBD-quinone and all the other stuff that's in our stormwater. And NMFS has done some research on that, and what they have discovered is that you can remove these toxins from water, and simple sand and compost medium will work at a depth of 24 inches. So we're going to see a lot more emphasis on infiltration and bioretention in the future. In the meantime, we have a few tools in our toolbox that I want to share with you. The first one is the no effect determination, which we reserve the right at local programs on behalf of Federal Highway Administration to determine project no effect. However, these are getting more and more difficult for us to argue successfully. And in 2022, this is going to get ratcheted down even further. We're getting some design guidance that's likely going to come out in the next couple months that's going to probably remove this as a possibility for anything that's generating new pollution generating impervious surface. We can still probably run sidewalks, bike lanes, if they're separated. So there needs to be a physical separation, something that will prevent a car from driving on the separated lane. So not just a paint stripe on a road, but something that means I'm going to have vehicle damage if I screw up. So even a planter strip will work. But we're going to need a lot more information on stormwater as well. Where's it going? Where's it outfall, etc. The other item that I think is going to be widely used is going to be concurrent right-of-way acquisition. So a couple years ago, local programs negotiated with FHWA's Washington Division Office the concept of concurrent right-of-way acquisition. And what this does is it allows local agencies to begin their right-of-way acquisition before NEPA is complete. So you can kind of condense some of those timelines on your Gantt chart. However, you can't do this if your right-of-way phase is federally funded. If your right-of-way phase is federally funded, you still do need that NEPA complete before you can obligate those funds. So I know there was talk earlier about getting creative with how you program your money. That's something to consider. And then the last one I want to talk about is Region Road Maintenance Program 4D. This is available to about 37 or 38 different jurisdictions in the Puget Sound area. And what it does is you as an agency commit to certain training for your maintenance staff and reporting requirements to NMFS. And in exchange, you don't have to do ESA consultations for routine maintenance projects. And when I say maintenance, I'm talking about even contracted projects. It looks at the scope of the work. So we're seeing this used a fair bit on our bridge programs, so like seismic retrofits, rehabs, scour. We've even done bridge replacements under 4D. We've done fish passage culverts under 4D. We've gotten fairly aggressive with how we use it with the agencies that are qualified. And I took notes during the introductions, and it looks like we've got Kitsap County, Clallam County, Mason County, and Polsbo. So you have that available to you as an option to satisfy your formal ESA requirement. So work with Jody. She'll get you through the process. I know she's done it, and it's a great opportunity. I will say that if you're expanding your infrastructure in any way, it's going to be a little bit more problematic. So the STBG, the TAP, some of those programs don't get to play with this as much. So it is basically maintenance scope projects. And if you have drifted off during this presentation, this is the time to wake up and look at your screen. This is the slide that sucks all the proverbial oxygen out of our virtual room. This is when people wiggle in their seats and moan and groan. If we can't use some of the tools on that previous slide, this is what we're looking at for timelines. And that is because National Marine Fisheries Service needs a hydraulics report to be complete before we can even write the biological assessment. And typically the hydraulics report doesn't come until 60% design. Remember my opening slide, I had that mapped out, that ESA is at 60% design, and then we have to budget time to consult with the services. So I've been asked this question a lot over the last year. What's the time frame that I'm looking at? And this is my best guess as far as how to program the money to move to the next phase. And I know a lot of agencies are scrambling to get extensions right now on their right-of-way or their construction funding in Northwest region. I don't know about Olympic region, but I know this is becoming very real. And so I think there's value in setting realistic expectations. I'm not telling you what you want to hear.
Anyone else lose her?
Here, I fully realize that, but we need RAM. And again, in my open continuum, I mentioned that. Am I gone? Am I gone?
You're back now, but you were gone for a bit.
Okay, where was I when I disappeared?
You were just wrapping up the discussion about timelines.
Timelines. Okay, so not too bad. Okay, so this is something that we need to plan for and be aware of moving forward. And I mentioned that earlier in the presentation that the formal ESA consultation process typically applied to 15 to 20% of our program. Now it's going to apply more to like 80 to 85% of the program. We're seeing it switch. So this is going to come up on more and more projects. And so you're probably wondering what is on the horizon. Well, WSDOT, FHWA, and National Marine Fisheries Service have formed a technical working group, and the local programs ESA biologist is participating in this. And they are trying to craft a stormwater policy that will hopefully be in written form available for public consumption at the BA training coming up in March. What is likely to happen in the interim at NMFS is we're going to have batched consultations. So NMFS recognizes they're about to see an explosion in workload, and they do not have the staff to process it all. And so they're looking at maybe collecting stormwater only consultations and then maybe taking 3 or 4 projects and lumping them into one BIOP because they don't have the staff to write 5 or 6 BIOPs. In the long term, we need a programmatic agreement. And I think everybody understands that. They agree. It's just the devil's in the details. Who's going to write it? How are we going to pay for the BA writer? And all of that. So that's the direction we're likely moving. And with that, I'm going to leave you with this nice, serene picture from the Olympic Peninsula for you to contemplate your thoughts. And I'm going to check the chat now to see. Guess I'm going to have to stop sharing.
Yeah, you can either put questions in the chat or it's a small enough group. If you want to raise your hand, you can pipe up and just ask Melanie directly.
Okay, now I can't stop sharing my screen. Okay, so
Oh, you succeeded. We're good there.
Yeah.
Are you still looking at your nice serene view of Port Townsend and Marrowstone Island?
Sadly, no.
Sadly, no. Okay. Okay. So what's weird is my mother screen shows that I am still sharing, which is very interesting. Okay.
But you're not.
But I'm not. I'll just have to take it at that. Okay. So I know I just threw a ton of information at you in a very short amount of time, but I'm curious to see what your experiences have been. Has this started coming up on any of your projects? Have you had situations with National Marine Fisheries Service?
I have heard from others that this was going on, but I don't think we've had it yet internally here.
Melanie,
Okay.
this is Wendy Clark-Getson from Jamestown Spellum. Our
Sure.
government seat is going to be affected by 7 fish barrier passage projects, and they are 5 of them have been bundled into a design build call for proposals, request for proposals. So we've been trying to understand when they're getting their hydraulic report done so we can have something to comment on. But they basically used a preliminary hydraulic report, and they'll let the contractor finish it based on what the design is. So they're not even at a 60% design. So my question for you, knowing this confusion of when things begin, kind of like your timeline, when things start, when things end, when do we need to be concerned that this is happening now? Because I'm sure the state will be affected by what you're just been sharing with us.
Yes. Yes. So you're talking about WSDOT projects, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
On the 101?
Yes.
Okay. So WSDOT, they have a programmatic agreement with National Marine Fisheries Service right now. So they are not affected by this yet. So they still have a way to get through their ESA consultation process. They can do a formal in a couple of months. So it does not hurt them. And this policy shift does not hurt them the same way it hurts local agencies. So, so they're not going to be as concerned about it. That being said, National Marine Fisheries Service has indicated that they want to renegotiate that programmatic. And so that is why we are working together, and our collective local agency experience, we're kind of the foreshadowing for what WSDOT is about to experience, but they're not there yet. It sounds to me like you have some concerns about the projects, and that you're trying to figure out how to insert yourself in the public involvement process as well.
I won't go there because I'm sure there's other questions, but yes, we found a way to insert ourselves.
Okay.
In spite of categorical exclusions and other programmatic agreements with FHWA, we found a way to work compatibly together. So there is a way, no matter how complicated it is. Good. But just, yeah, a lot of cumulative effects of trying to stay ahead of the curve of what's this going to be like and how to explain it to our constituency and our citizenry and the general public. Like, this is not us, this is WSDOT. Thank you, Melanie. That was a great presentation. So anybody else with questions? I'm just going to back off from that question that you had for me.
Okay, so I'm looking in the chat.
And Teresa also has her hand up. So
I do. Okay, there we go. So who's got hand? Teresa?
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, we knew this would be coming with a project we're working on, which is going to be widening through kind of the I-5 area through Tumwater to Mounts Road. But also, I'm just curious, there's, consultation takes a long time, as we all know, but there's also that timeline that requires NEPA to be completed within 5 years. And this is going to significantly impact any work on that. Will there be adjustments that you're aware of to NEPA because of this?
So the short answer is no, there hasn't been any talk of that yet. I'm curious though, I'm curious about the 5 years.
That came out
My
of
understanding is there used to be a
decision.
10-year rule where
one
sorry?
federal decision changed it. So
Okay.
shortened it. So yeah, so that's one of the things we've been looking at with FHWA, and part of the reason for PEL is to help, decrease that timeline as much as possible. So the planning and environmental linkages that also came out of one federal decision. So
oh, you're doing a PEL, okay. So at this point, again, the answer is no. I have asked Federal Highway Administration for the latitude to sign NEPA documents without ESA being complete, and they are incredibly hesitant to go that direction.
And also just a note for everybody, this really impacts a PEL because the federal regulators, as you said, NEMS, NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife do not have the time to look at isn't even 30% design. And the PEL, when you go into the PEL, it's not even 30% design. I mean, you don't even have 1% design. So that's been one of the challenges I've found with the PEL, one decision, and trying to combine it with ESA.
So the thing about PEL, my understanding of it, and frankly, I haven't gotten to do one yet. I keep waiting for it to come up in my area, but it hasn't. The thing about PEL is it is a great tool for your public involvement compliance, and based on the public outreach and the alternatives analysis that you do in PEL, a lot of times it can downgrade your project from being a higher level NEPA document down to a CE. So that is one of the huge benefits of doing a PEL. And you mentioned that you are doing some widening in the Mounts Road area. So that could be really helpful. I don't want to discourage PEL at all. However, PEL and ESA are kind of two different animals. And like you said, trying to get the services to engage in a planning process when they can't even figure out staffing for funded projects has been a problem. It's definitely been a problem. But like I said, I've asked Federal Highways, and they are extremely hesitant to entertain going ahead and signing NEPA documents without ESA complete. And typically, the times I've seen them do it, it has been where the biological opinion is imminent and we're going to miss another construction season. I mean, there's like a level of urgency tied to it, not hey, we want to be competitive for this next round of funding applications. They have not been receptive to that at this point.
I have a question for you, Melanie. A lot our local partners are within the next few months, they're going to start putting together their 6-year tips. They're going to be applying for federal grants that will require them to indicate when they plan to obligate those phases and their financial consequences to them if they don't meet those targets. The local programs has a sanctioning process. So if projects don't proceed as planned and there's not a way of accommodating that quickly, a region or a county can lose funds. What advice would you give our local partners as they think about what this is going to mean for timing, as they start putting together their project delivery programs? Some of them, have projects already in the pipeline that are going to be affected by this. Others are going to be thinking about projects that will be affected. What advice would you give them with so much uncertainty in the air? How do they think about the timing of this, or whether or not federal funding is the right color of money for some of these projects? What advice would you give?
So this is a great time to intercept a project, actually, and this is why I'm meeting with MPOs. That now is when you set the expectation of what your timelines will be. And part of the reason I started meeting with MPOs is that we're seeing PE phase and right-of-way phase obligation years, like sometimes the same year up in PSRC's area. And just intuitively, we know with this new reality, that's not going to be workable. And so the agencies are being set up for failure by trying to show that they were condensing their timelines. And I think we need to be realistic about when we can move to the next phase, when we can move to right away, when we can move to construction. So I think that's very important. The other thing, I'm gonna give a shout out to Jody. I hope she's still on. Get us involved, get our office involved early. I think you have Dawn and, oh, I can't remember who all is out in the Olympic region now. Dawn and Brittany.
Andrea's out there.
Andrea's out there. Okay. And Brian Diaz's office, get them involved. And we do NEPA kickoffs. You don't have to have your funding secured for us to talk with you about your project and what we think the implications are going to be. And we can get our eyeballs on it early and see if this is even going to be a problem for you. And if it is, then you can plan accordingly and figure out what money to program where. Like I said, concurrent right-of-way is an option. And there's no penalty for agencies if they want to acquire right-of-way after a NEPA has started, but before NEPA is complete. So that's something to think about when you're trying to figure out where to program your money. So those are a couple of options for agencies, but definitely get our office involved. I mean, we meet with people, and now that we're in the remote environment, it's amazing how many meetings we can have because we're not driving all over the place. So definitely pick up the phone, get us involved.
Well, that's really helpful because there's about to be a lot of federal money washing into Washington State. You know, like it's going to come up through the regional programs. There's going to be, you know, fresh calls for federal funding through state processes, through federal. So it's just really important timing wise that people know what they're walking in on. I see Michael's got comments in the chat box. Michael, what are you thinking about there? Let's see, separate from consultation timelines. Oh, he's asking what has been the result of the consultations?
Yeah, I have this Weird Al Yankovic song going through my head from back in the 80s. I lost at Jeopardy. I am aware of that. I believe I'm aware of it on the Army Corps side. I haven't heard of this bubbling up, but I'm taking notes here. I would like to know more about the situation. FEMA floodplain. Okay. Take it away, Michael.
Well, yeah, it came up because of floodplain, but it caught my attention. So these were a bunch of shoreline projects, and our port had a project which didn't end up actually in the package, which delayed them even further. But they went and they packaged, I want to say it was 38 or something like that, of the shoreline projects that had bulkheads and other stuff together. And they flat said, no, these projects jeopardize endangered species, period. Even though you're following all the rules, you are still jeopardizing endangered species. They wrote a biological opinion that included all of them. And that BIOP ended up with a whole lot of extra conditions on projects that changed the nature of some of the projects, in my understanding. So given that it looks to me like compliance with the stormwater manual may not be enough to prevent jeopardy of listed species, what are we seeing as a result of these consultations? Are they actually are they saying, yeah, jeopardy, and you guys need to completely do things different, or you're not doing enough? Or, I mean, because that blows your timeline out of the water even more than just having to go through consultation.
Yes. So the situation that you are talking about, we're aware of it, and it is due to overwater marine structures and the nearshore environment, and that was with the Army Corps of Engineers. So FEMA had a series of projects that went to the Army Corps. The Army Corps then that's been more of an Army Corps and National Marine Fisheries Service issue. Right. That chased all the way back to DC. The ports all got together, and I'm not sure who all else was involved, because my window into that world is through the WSDOT Ferries office. So I periodically check in with my counterpart for the WSDOT Ferries office. They're feeling the heat more on the overwater structure side. We're feeling the stormwater heat. So we compare notes.
Right. Yeah.
They eventually wrote a memorandum of agreement, and they're in the process of writing a programmatic right now.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And so what they're going to end up doing is instituting a mission calculator on projects. So they're creating a mechanism in order to by throwing the Jeopardy card. They're forcing mitigation essentially to happen through
Right.
ESA consultations.
Right.
Do I expect that to happen in the stormwater universe? I think it's probably a good foreshadowing event to take note of.
Yeah.
I would like
that
to
was
go,
my thought.
yeah, unfortunately, I think your thought is correct.
Well, and especially for projects that discharge to streams or rivers with listed species, right?
Yeah, and we haven't seen a consultation yet. I have two projects that have been sitting at NMFS for about, well, we're coming up on 2 years now, that are stormwater only, and they haven't gotten any opinion written yet. So we don't know yet what their analysis is going to be. So I think the critical piece here is you mentioned the highway runoff manual. You are absolutely 100% correct. The highway runoff manual does not, it's apples and oranges, highway runoff manual versus ESA. That manual was never consulted on. Clean Water Act standards, NMFS has made very clear, since there's a mixing zone requirement. Remember we went that plume analysis in High Run that NMFS agreed to. Well, they agreed to a 1 foot or less plume back in 2009. There's no way they're going to tolerate a 300-foot mixing zone. So, or whatever Clean Water Act Clean Water Act standards required. It's longer than what NMFS's tolerance is. So ideally, if I ran the universe, I would get the hydraulics office involved and write the hydraulics manual to the ESA compliance, just so that we have one set of rules and everybody knows how to design their projects, but I don't. We started going that direction. But then we lost our stormwater program branch manager. So we've got a new one that we're trying to get up to speed. So lots of change going on.
I've been through a similar process on the developer world here with a project that was vested to the old 92 stormwater manual, but discharged to a stream with listed species. And so that old manual for sure did not protect the stream. So they were adamant that they were going to stay vested to that manual. Like, okay, but compliance with the manual is not compliance with ESA. So you got 2 whole separate paths you're going to have to deal with. And we're going to have to review you under 2 whole separate pieces. And just because you tick the stormwater box, you still have to go through all the process it takes to tick the ESA box. And it was problematic for the developer.
I had an agency up in Snohomish County decide, after they had some wetland fills and a fish passage culvert and some stormwater discharges, and we submitted it to them as an informal consultation because they were above fish presence in the stream systems. They were at the upper ends of the watershed. And so there were plenty of fish barriers we could point to. So under the existing written BA manual guidance, it counted as an informal. Their plume length did not intercept listed fish. We were informal. And they wrote a letter of non-concurrence in response. And so the agency said, fine, we're just not going to seek federal funds on the project. We don't have federal funds yet. We're just not going to do it. Just withdraw the consultation, pretend we don't have a project, go away. They were more polite about it, but that was definitely kind of like, fine, we'll go through the Army Corps. 2 months later, they pick up the phone and call me back. Well, the Army Corps says we have to do a formal. So I think the Army Corps is getting brought into the stormwater universe as well. Whereas they used to put their blinders on and say, ordinary high water mark, this is my territory, I don't look beyond it. Now I think they're being forced to look at stormwater as well. So I'm really not sure what avenues around this agencies are going to have. One thing I can share on the MOA about the overwater structures is there are 2 regulatory routes written into it. One is for congressional mandates, and the other is for just regular private sector development type projects. And so this is a way above my pay grade conversation that's happening back in DC as to whether or not we can fit under the congressional mandate program. And our ferries office is queuing up that conversation. So lots to be, but that's the overwater structure piece. That's not the stormwater piece.
Yeah.
So, but I think stormwater is going to mirror.
Yeah, I think it's going to, yeah, it just seemed like foreshadowing. It seems to me like a great solution would be to get a list of BMPs / methods of treating, these are approved. If you were doing these in addition to your stormwater manual, if you pick out of this list, then you're going to be okay. If you do anything else, you're not, and that would be the way to go, I think, and then just qualify it. Are you discharging to a stream with listed species? Yes. Follow that list. Moving on.
And a lot of agencies, I'm going to show my ignorance. I think I've driven through Poulsbo a few times, but I'm not super familiar with it. But I know a lot of my agencies in Northwest region, they've inherited legacy systems.
Oh yeah.
They are in a geographic position where they are pinned in by water, or they have terrible soils that don't infiltrate, or all three. I mean, they just don't have choices, and they're coming to me. A lot of them are being very proactive and asking, hey, can I trade? Can I maybe acquire some of this Costco parking lot over here and swap it for the stormwater that I can't treat and have to discharge on my project? Or can I over treat in this area of my city because I can, and just meet highway runoff manual requirements at my bridge site? I mean, there's just all these questions, and I would like some sort of programmatic that gives us that latitude, because I think there's a lot of, just looking ecologically, I think there's a lot of harm that's been done that is not, it's not something that you can capture under Section 7. I mean, they're just, a lot of private developments don't ever see that Endangered Species Act review. And so it's a lost opportunity. Really.
Well, and if we make it too hard to comply, as you mentioned, then there won't be any compliance.
Right.
So we're not going to make any gains if we make it impossible. We've got to find a way to make it, doable for everyone. Otherwise, we're not going to make any gains at all.
Right. Right. And, my agencies that want to do the right thing and are being proactive, if I could guarantee them some sort of regulatory relief, they would jump on that. And but I can't. I at this point I can't say, hey, Bellingham, your project's going to be looked on more favorably if you do something about those strip malls over there. I just can't. I can't promise anything. Right.
I'm gonna go back to mute and stop video. I've dominated the conversation plenty here.
Let's see, pulling up chat. This will apply to FTA.
Yeah, this was just, we've been talking about federal highways, but a lot of our partners get money from FTA. Much of that goes to buses and capital and operations that wouldn't be affected, but they build things too, whether it's stop pads or, facilities. And so I'm assuming this will pertain to them as well.
I am guessing it will. In the beginning of these conversations, FHWA invited FTA into these discussions with National Marine Fisheries Service. And I haven't seen Mark at a lot of these meetings recently. However, I have heard chatter from consultants working on FTA projects calling me up about, hey, I've got this parking lot, what's going to happen to me? And the big question is, I don't know, but I would expect, especially if you have a core nexus, you're going to get, you might be in a gray area right now. FTA might still be no affecting stormwater only, but
I'm kind of curious. We have transit folks on, or have any of you bumped into this yet with any of your projects? Is it bubbling up yet? Are you getting rumors of it, or is this still mostly on the city county roadway side of things?
I have not run into this yet, so.
Okay.
I haven't either.
Okay,
I haven't either. I do know FTA is beefing up their environmental specialist department, hiring on other folks, because Mark's kind of been a one-man show there. So yeah, we do still submit DCE worksheets if we're wanting to purchase right away ahead of going through full NEPA. So I can see that now being a bigger risk. But no, we have not received any sort of formal direction from FTA.
Yeah, the only chatter I've heard was, like I said, a consultant working on some sound transit work had pinged me with a few questions, but
They
yeah,
would be
I
the
don't know.
first to trip it, I'm sure, given what they're doing. How about others? Any other questions? Can you guys see, you've got issues with projects that you might maybe have in the pipeline and not sure how this is going to affect what you think you're doing? And do you know where to get the information that you need if you do have questions?
I do have one question. We're working with WSDOT directly on an SR 303 direct access on-ramp off of Ridgetop, which will be next to our Silver Hill Transit Center once that's constructed. I imagine that it's not going through local programs, but as we progress that design, I imagine all of WSDOT is aware of this new NEPA process.
So as long as you're in WSDOT and they're running the environmental, you still get to use their programmatic.
Okay.
So there are advantages to playing with WSDOT. And I'm seeing Jody smile.
Yes. Yeah, if you're running it through Jeff Sawyer's office, you should be good to go.
Well, I still believe we still have to go through an FTA NEPA reevaluation on this particular project since it's tied to our Silver Hill Transit Center. So, but that's good to know. I'll, in our next meeting, at least broach that subject.
Oops. I'll say to our transit partners that if there is something that is affecting all of you or likely to affect all of you related to this, if you give us a shout, we'll happily try to track down whoever Melanie's equivalent is. That would be, you know, the right point person to come in from FTA to try to address some questions all at once. How about anything else out there? We really appreciate Melanie's time, but this is a great chance if you've got anything else to bring up with her or Jody, having Jody here at the same time on the environmental side of things.
What you know how this is going to impact the local jurisdictions permitting process? I know I heard the city of Paulsville talking through it, but do you know at what point that flows down to the local jurisdictions?
As far as like the Growth Management Act, the critical areas, shoreline, those types of regulations?
Right.
I don't know that it is going to affect them because I don't know that they have a federal nexus. It's really that federal nexus. It's are you on federal land? Do you need a federal permit, or do you have federal funding? I mean, those are the three triggers that bring you into the Endangered Species Act Section 7 compliance. Now, a lot of times when you have a local critical areas ordinance approval that you need, you also need an Army Corps permit. So it's the Army Corps permit that's going to be your nexus into ESA, not the local regulation. But there's a lot of overlap, especially with wetlands, anything in water.
Yeah, and I think if you have a project and you don't know if you're going to get federal funding or not, but there is the possibility, and you're worried about this, contact us early. You don't need federal funding to contact us to talk about the project. You just need the funding before we sign NEPA. So yeah, get a hold of us as soon as you can so we can lay out a plan.
Yeah, we talk to you for free.
Thank you.
Melanie, I'm going to step in. I know Catherine's audio is not all that great for jumping in. She just sent you a chat that brings up a good point, that are non-motorized projects in the pipeline exempt from what we're discussing here today? Does it have to be a motorized facility that's creating, because it seems like you did identify that just inherently tires create particulates that end up disrupting habitat?
So the answer is going to be it depends. And it's going to depend on the design of that trail. So I've got a situation up in Everson right now, which is way up almost by the Canadian border, where the town unfortunately is right by the Nooksack River. And they have a project where it's a safe routes to schools project. It's not what's this one? My eyes are terrible. It doesn't say the funding, it just says the trail. But they're adding sidewalk, but when they add the sidewalk, they're adding curb and gutter, and they're concentrating their stormwater and then treating it and discharging it. That concentration, because you concentrated it, now you own it, and then the discharge will trigger the formal. So yes, it's a sidewalk project, no new PGIS, and we're still trying to figure out a design way to get them out of having to do this. If you can fully separate your trail so there's no physical interaction with pollution generating impervious surface, then you should be exempt from it. You'll get a no effect, most likely. But again, the devil's going to be in the details of where does that trail connect into the surface road network? What does that look like? How much pollution generating impervious surface does it share? Yeah, putting, like I've had in some of the tighter urban corridors where people are doing cycle tracks. People are putting barriers, like actual physical barriers, where they used to put the paint stripe in order to prevent the trail from becoming pollution generating impervious surface, and we can still get to no effect on that. But cars cannot be driving on any part of the trail. Let's see what else was in the.
Look, a comment from Brittany talking about future nexus. This is your chance, folks. Any other last questions for Melanie, or things that you would just like more information on, if we can track it down for you?
Yeah, Brittany, my crystal ball, it's kind of like Michael's. I see we're literally trying to figure out how to digest new science, and the science is coming at us, and it's pretty loud and it's pretty clear. And whether or not it's trickled down to local governments yet, I think it's just a matter of time. But there's always that delay. We're still trying to figure out how to deal with it at the federal regulation level, but who knows? I mean, it could come to us from the state legislature for all we know. I don't know. But I suspect you're right that this is going to get.
I agree. I think there'll be a lag, and but those state resource agencies, now that the science is there, they're going to put the pressure on the local governments eventually, and the NPDES permits and the ecology stormwater manual. I think eventually over time it'll all be updated.
I think it will, but there's a lot of science that's conflicting even. So NIM says, okay, our polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are filtered out if we put 40% compost in our media. Well, but there's a lot of systems, especially urban systems, where we don't want to be adding more nutrients. And so you've got that conflict point between Clean Water Act standards and ESA, and how do we resolve that? So there's a lot of conversations that still need to happen, because this touches on a lot of different aspects of how we manage the built environment.
I'm so glad.
I'd say we just really appreciate, Melanie, you showing up and giving us an update and keeping us informed on what you know. You're at a little bit higher level than we are, so you're hearing the conversation a little bit sooner than we're going to hear it. So the staying in contact is really helpful for all of us.
Well, and I appreciate the opportunity to have these kinds of conversations with folks, so I can, number one, understand what your experiences are out in the field and kind of take take that back to federal highways, but also it's an opportunity for me to help explain how we got to where we are, so that you can figure out how to plan appropriately, so we don't have a project land into crisis mode where, I'm going to pick on one of my agencies again, Marysville. They walked into this blind, and they're almost at the end of their extension time to obligate their write-ons, and I don't know if they're going to make it. I really don't know if they're going to make it, which that'll be the first agency that I know of that has lost funds due to this time delay that's in their project schedule. So, yeah, I mean, it's real, it's happening. And whether or not PSRC has the latitude to give them another extension, I don't know. I mean, those are not conversations that I'm involved in the room for. However, that's also part of the reason why I'm jumping at every opportunity to talk to folks, not just in the engineering part of project delivery, but back it up to the planning stage, because the way we set it up impacts how the engineering will work. I mean, the engineers might be able to rearrange some of their tasks in their Gantt chart so they can maybe get to 60% design a little bit earlier, but when you get handed a project, and this used to happen to me when I was in WSDOT all the time, I would get handed a project, and by the time the project lands on my desk, we're already behind schedule, and we already aren't going to be able to make that add date that they've set. And I can just look at the project and tell based on the environmental clearances I know I need to get. It's like, you just handed me a dud.
Melanie, can I go back to the beginning of your presentation? You were talking about maintenance programmatic agreements, the RRMP4 parenthetical D. Do you know offhand how many of the PR to PO members are part of that agreement? And would you recommend more agencies get involved in that process and get signed up?
So my understanding, in your area, you've got Kitsap, Clallam, and Mason counties, and then the city of Poulsbo. For super small jurisdictions that don't do a huge amount of work in the aquatic environment, I don't know that there'd be a cost benefit. There'd be a benefit to the cost, because it is, you're sending maintenance crews to a series of trainings and whatnot. And there's most of the burden is going to be on the maintenance side of your house, not your capital project development side. So it's a conversation that you do need to have with your maintenance shops. But definitely for the bigger agencies, the counties, there is benefit to it, and it's worth looking into. And some of the cities, I know in my area, some of my bigger cities have it available to them. I know there used to be up in Clallam County. Oh, I can picture him. I can't think of his name right now. Dave LaSorsa? Was there? Yeah, he was a huge champion about it. I mean, he was running around selling the program before he retired. And then I want to say Mason County, is Jeremy Graham still around? I don't know. I'm dating myself, clearly. I'm trying to think of folks locally that could some of your peers in your area that you could talk with, in addition, so you know who to pick up the phone and talk to. But I think there is benefit. I think there definitely is benefit. One thing to keep in mind is it's only good for the threatened species, not endangered. So if any of your Chinook runs or any of your salmonid runs are endangered, then you would not be able to use 4D to satisfy ESA compliance. So that's something to think about as well. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, Olympic region is like the one part of WSDOT that I've never worked on projects. I've worked everywhere else except Olympic region, so I'm not that familiar with all the runs out there.
How would, if an agency wanted to participate in that, who do they contact? How would they go about, if they've talked to their peers and they said, yeah, this is something we want to do, how would they go about getting to be a part of that?
Gregor Meyer with WSDOT Maintenance, and I can, after the meeting, send you his contact information, but he can get you set up and get you an overview of the program.
We'll provide that information for everybody who's on. We'll post a copy of the video on our YouTube channel. and the slides and any other and contact information for Melanie, and we'll throw Jody's contact information in there too, just so you have it. And then anything else that Melanie sends that would be useful for you right now. So are there any more questions or discussion? I don't want to keep you if we're done, but want to make sure. Got a bunch of red muted microphones on my screen, so it looks like nothing else. So I guess if not, then we'll go ahead and thank you very, very much, Melanie, for taking the time to come today and to field these questions, and for the rest of the Olympic region team who showed up as well. So hopefully we're all a little bit smarter as we move forward in this next era of project delivery, smarter and hopefully more efficient as well.
Thank you. Well, and just remember, pick up the phone and talk to us. Go through your local programs office. Brian Diaz's folks. Jody's free. We're free. We can talk through your projects.
Alrighty.